Hello, and welcome to this Admin Essentials Roundtable on University-UCEDD relationships. I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. My name is Jamie Koenig, and I'm a program specialist at AUCD. I am a young white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a light green shirt. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. In particular, I'd like to thank Deborah Spidolnik, Director of the Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities. Sorry, I'm admitting people at the same time, so if I'm back and forth, my apologies. The Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities at Rutgers, and Derek Nord, Director of the Indiana University on Disability and Community at the University of Indiana, for joining us today as content experts to discuss how they've navigated relationships with their university and approached MOU negotiations. This is a space to discuss methods, strategies, successes, and setbacks in university relationships. We want this to be a more informal roundtable conversation. So if you have a question at any time, feel free to chime in. If you do speak, please start by stating your name. And if it's the first time you're contributing, if you could provide a brief image description, that would be great. If you'd prefer to put your question in the chat, I'll make sure to read it out loud for everyone. We do have cart captioning available, and if you want to access it, just click the CC button at the bottom of the screen, and you can click on it again to see the settings to make them bigger or smaller, whatever's best for you. This meeting is being recorded and will be available a few days following the event, as well as a written transcript from the captioner. In hopefully just a month or so, we'll also have a tip sheet with the takeaways from this meeting. In just a moment, I'm going to hand it off to Derek and Deborah to kick off our conversation, but I do want to first give a brief overview of our upcoming report on University-UCEDD relationships and MOUs across the network. I did send you all the draft version earlier this morning because we were hoping to have it finalized, but you know how that last minute formatting always takes longer than expected. So I'll make sure to include it in the final version in the follow-up email as well. So let me find my PowerPoint. It's one of those moments that I wish I had 3 screens instead of 2. Sorry, I just need to put it in present, and I'm gonna go ahead and share a screen with just some of the key takeaways from this. Can everyone see that okay? Yes, I see a few nods. Great. Always a little nervous it's not gonna share. So AUCD disseminated a survey last summer asking about MOUs and other agreements that about MOUs and University-UCEDD relationships prior to and during COVID. Between all of the requests we made, we ultimately received 44 formal agreements and 44 distinct responses to the survey. And the breakdown ended up being fairly representative of what we see across the network in terms of administrative homes. So the COVID-specific questions were analyzed last fall. So this report did not look at those and rather focused on long-term relationship factors. But through qualitative analysis, reading the MOUs repeatedly and identifying key inclusions across them, commonalities, is able to identify what's common across the network and also unique and effective uses of the MOUs and relationships building to advance UCEDD interests. Analysis was then done of certain subsets, including Carnegie classification, budget size, and administrative home. And if there's any additional thing that you want it broken up by, let me know, because I am happy to play with the data a bit more if that would be helpful to you all. So just a few notable findings before I open it up for conversation led by Deborah and Derek. Sorry, I have to admit more people. A notable survey finding was that at least 5 UCEDDs are really valued contributors to university initiatives to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. And given how the current AUCD network-wide priority is to do just that, it was great to see how some universities are using their positionality within the university to really advance that work, both within the university, within the center, and in the broader community. And it also sounded like other UCEDDs were promoting their visibility and perceived valued by aligning the priorities with the universities. So this seemed like a really key point, a key area for people to take advantage of moving forward in this work. Another common theme was how UCEDDs frequently lack a committed communications person or plan, which is understandable given scarce resources. So I did want to just take this opportunity while you're all here to plug that there is an AUCD social media work group that's meeting this Wednesday, the 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're interested in that, I can get you the information. I totally forgot that I have slides because I'm busy looking at admitting people. Wow, quality. My apologies. Now the slide that's up does have a few more takeaways from the survey. I've shared the ones that I thought were most interesting. I would recommend looking at the report for more information about all of these and any others. As a whole, MOUs reflects the requirements laid out in the DD Act and FOAs. So, but I did want to highlight a few notable inclusions that reflected some creative problem solving. One MOU stipulated 4 reserved parking spaces for community members visiting the UCEDD, and seeing as another UCEDD had specifically mentioned a lack of parking as a problem, I just thought that that was a really great thing to highlight of how these MOUs can be used to go above and beyond the legal requirement and to advance your own interests as UCEDDs. Other interesting items included guaranteed UCEDD ownership of all research and data, a process for dispute resolution when the immediate administrator overseeing the UCEDD was at odds with the UCEDD director, and a detailed statement of beliefs, principles, and values. And when I say detailed, it was a page long and it was incredibly thorough, and I was very impressed with it. You can see an excerpt of that in the report. So that was just a super brief overview of some of the things that seemed most relevant to just like quickly go over the best ofs. But there's a lot of information in that report, and I definitely encourage you all to check it out. But with that, I want to turn it over to Deborah and Derek. I'll just give them each an opportunity to do a brief overview of their relationship with the university and anything that they think is really important to start this conversation about navigating university-UCEDD relationships. And then we'll open it up to questions, comments, and discussion. Deborah, would you like to go first?
Well, you know what, at first, I think Derek's going to go first with introductions. But before that, I always think it's important to answer my grandmother's question, with whom am I speaking? Because I think even in our introductions, there are ways that we can shape that to people's interests. So we had created 2 poll questions that I think would help us. So Jamie, could we launch those? And that would, I think, help all of us about how long you've been in your role as a director, and have you previously negotiated a University-UCEDD MOU? So we'd ask people to respond, and have the results. And maybe Derek, we could start slowly introducing ourselves while we see that, and maybe we'll each introduce ourselves.
I think I've met most of you. I'm Derek Nord. I am the director of the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University. I've been there for let me back up. I'm a Caucasian white male, brown hair, wearing a green jacket, not the best with colors, but I think it's green, and I should ask my wife for some help. And I think it's a white shirt, beige shirt. Anyway, I'm sorry, the colors aren't the best for me. Anyway, I'm the director of the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University. I've been there for, just finished my 5th year, so it's going on 6 years here. And I came from Minnesota, so I was in the UCEDD there for some time. I have a faculty appointment in the School of Education. The institute itself is housed within under the Office of the Vice Provost for Research. So we're in kind of the administrative side of the academic house of the university's house rather than an academic department. I think I'll just pause right there and Deb, let you kind of catch up on your.
Great, thank you. I'm a white woman with white hair. wearing glasses, pearl earrings, and more dressed up than I've been in a long time. Still wearing Crocs, but you can't see that. I have a white background with some floral prints and books piled up public television style. I started at what's now the Temple. I started at the Temple UCEDD many, many years ago and started the first community programs from a UCEDD. And in 1983, I founded the Boggs Center, what's now the Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities, which is New Jersey's UCEDD and LEND. And we are at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. We are administratively within the Department of Pediatrics, but address children and adults in the lifespan, in part through our Memorandum of Understanding. And so I would, I guess, start there. So it's a different set of experiences, and my faculty appointment is in both pediatrics and family medicine. And we just size-wise, we have 7 faculty and about 35 staff, which makes us a little anomalous. And what I said I would do was also, is a kind of jumping off point, is show the Rubik's Cube that I always use with trying to explain a UCEDD to people, that we have the same federal mandates, but the state we're in, the university we're in, where we're located, makes for a lot of complexity. So how we can help support the sort out some of the issues that people are confronting. As a group, we seem to be hovering about people who've been with the UCEDD kind of a moderate amount of time, unclear whether you actually had to provide the leadership role in your UCEDD, and of the group assembled today, 60% have never negotiated an MOU. And there was a question that Karen asked, which is really for Jamie and AUCD, about examples of an MOU.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in on that when there was a pause. So we don't have them in a public space, but every MOU I received, I asked if it was available to be shared. So if you are interested in any full examples of MOUs, you can reach out to me and I can probably find you one that's a similar UCEDD size, similar budget, same administrative home and all of that. So I'll just put my email in the chat. And so if you want that, you can email me at any time and I can find that for you.
And I think a couple of general points have emerged through other roundtables and in Derek and I meeting with AUCD about the importance of relationships in developing an MOU, and the issues of what is enduring or solid as key leadership in the university may change as the ground rules may change, what specificity you want, or whether it's adaptive in some ways for generality, how you use the federal requirements as both the jumping off point, but also as the floor of what's needed. So those are some of the kinds of things that that people have, talked about. Derek, is there anything you want to add, or should we open up for questions or considerations?
Yeah, maybe just, sorry, go ahead.
And also whether you're seeking a change in your status at this point. Derek, sorry, I'm a psychologist. I not only answer a question with a question, I keep talking. So
no, not a problem. I think maybe just a couple things worth thinking about as we talk. In our kind of planning meeting, that we had, there was this realization that, as Deb and I are talking, I think there's a broad spectrum that we as directors fall on, and both our view around relationships, but also MOUs. And I think Deb and I fall, I think, in different places on that spectrum. And I say that as a real positive, because I think the challenge that we all have is figuring out what our personal approach is to it and feeling comfortable with that. And then being able to, I think also what emerged in our conversation is being able to evolve and develop that depending on the time periods and kind of the urgency of a particular year. So I think I'll just provide just a little more context around kind of the MOU. There's our UCEDD MOU, but we also have another MOU with the university that I was able to negotiate. So on our university, I came in on at a point when there were some big changes in leadership and thus decision-making around really important things like rent, things like indirect costs. And they were big, and they happened the year before, or the year before the previous director retired, David Main, meaning he wasn't able to negotiate any of these new things in the event he wanted to kind of keep them in place. And my approach moving into my negotiations with where I operate from is really, as it is with both of the MOUs that I've had, is how do I get these, how do I protect our organization financially? How do I prevent as much risk as, prevent as much risk of our organization, either financially or personnel wise, whatever it is? How do I protect our organization within the university? And then how do I try to protect it for the long term? So my approach to our UCEDD MOU was really I recognize that seats change. In my 5 years, all of the leadership that hired me and was in the university, from the president on down to my boss, who's the vice provost, every seat has changed at least once. And not for bad things, for retirements or just because people are done in their positions, but they change. And I feared that those changing seats we can really lose on kind of the long-term kind of direction that we want within our university. So I felt it was really important to really get in writing things like our very high indirect rate. I thought it was really important that we have it in writing that the university will cover our rent, because my fear has always been what happens when a new player comes to town and they've got a different idea. MOUs are as close to a contract as you can get in the university environment, and I have to use those to protect ourselves. At the same time, I think there's a really important piece of, at least on my approach, has been you can't throw the kitchen sink at it. So it's really a process for me to prioritize what are the most important and urgent things that I feel I want to institutionalize, for lack of a better word, but keep going from here on out. That would be best for our organization. So that's really been my approach. And we can talk about the relationship stuff, but I think I'll just touch on that real quick here. I think, for me, these aren't, I am always uncomfortable just asking for things like in our first conversation. It's a very Minnesota thing, I think, Midwestern thing, is you just don't ask unless you have a relationship. So when you're asking for things like money, when you're asking for someone's rent, to me, you should have a relationship with people. And so I really invest in those relationships really as a long-term strategy for these kind of big asks that I have for our organization. So to me, those relationships undergird all of the asks that I have in my MOUs, and they don't just happen. They're not one-offs. They're ongoing, and they're both within my unit, within my department, but also across the university. So I'm going to pause there. Deb, feel free to chime in.
That's great. Whoever's calling in from area code 504, could you, not section 504, could you please mute? Thanks. The other thing that I would add to Derek's in a very general sense is that the context that we're in is that what a UCEDD is very anomalous in the medical school. I've been told it's been getting less anomalous as there's more emphasis on interdisciplinary work, but it's not a construct that's easily understood. And so our obligation to clarify that, make it accessible, and also identify how we contribute to the life of the university, and therefore it's legitimate to have, for us to have requests is important. I also think there's some interesting issues around whether a UCEDD and a LEND, or a UCEDD only or a LEND only. And I'd say in an informal way, I wouldn't ask AUCD to say this, in thinking about the MOU that derives from the UCEDD grant. There are things about LEND that can be included that ACL is very comfortable with. There's not the same view from MCH about referencing the UCEDD. So that's one thing, but maybe this is a good time to ask people to raise questions or prompts for our conversation.
Maybe I can start. Hi, this is Kiriko Takahashi from Hawaii UCEDD. I am in the position as an interim director at the Hawaii. I have been a director for Pacific Basin for quite some time, but for both UCEDD, I have not negotiated a MOU. And last year when I came on board, after our director resigned, I have not renegotiated the MOU because our university has been going a lot of the reorganization, and with the whole budget cuts and pandemic, and there are lots of moving parts. So Derek, I think you brought a really good question, or like to center around how to think about the MOU. But I have a question on when or how, what is the best approach to bring up about a MOU that our UCEDD and the university has this MOU and how did you approach that, if you did, or what would be a good approach? I actually didn't want to bring the MOU up last year with our dean just because of the so many changes that was happening, and I didn't want him to think about our MOU when we didn't know how to protect our organization, or how to what would be the best. So I don't know if you have a input or your process, that would be helpful, or Deborah, if you have input too.
I think I see it in a few different ways, and I think a lot of people here have experience around this too. I think for one, I applaud you on your of thinking that through. I think the content, the environment, your current environment matters. Last year at this time was very different than this year at this time, and asks what you're going to ask for, things like that. I mean, that's part of our job, is to constantly be on our toes and be able to feel those moments out. And sometimes there's opportunity moments. Sometimes you just want to not mention anything because there's a lot of threat out there from administrators higher up having to solve other budgetary or other issues. So I think that's part of our job, is constantly to figure that out, and that's not easy. I think for me, I kind of see it in two ways. I think there's the ongoing process of keeping people informed of the MOU, and then which I feel like is an ongoing. I see it kind of, there's a reason that it's necessary to keep that in front of people on an ongoing basis. One is just to simply inform them, but I also think if we're protecting our whatever's in that MOU, if we're protecting it only when people start looking at the problem or looking at solutions to your organization, say they want to, for me, my big fear is when they come saying that they want to change our indirect and reduce what we get. rather than them be surprised that there's an MOU on the books, I want them to know about it prior. I want them to think and imagine that this is a legacy that's been going on for a long time. And I want to make sure I've communicated that with them. So when other, the person who signs my MOU is the vice provost for research, but the people who actually implement that are people at various levels below him, be it HR, be it the financial office that he has operating. So there are times when people don't understand that there's an MOU, people who aren't signers of that. And it's important for me to bring that up to make sure that they're informed of the agreements that are in place, because they might not be informed of that. So that might be when they start a job. That might be, so to me, it's, you gotta have to figure out who you're training in and what information they need to know and what effect can they have. So I think of that as a protecting and a reminding process. I think probably what you're talking to mostly is how do you, for me, our MOU changes. I suppose it could change any time we wanted to agree to a new MOU, but I see it kind of as a good moment every 5 years when our UCEDD grant comes up to restate our commitments and to carry forward in the way that we agreed to at that moment. Unless there's some big crisis, I don't see the need to go back and rehash a MOU from, in the middle of a grant. So right now, I think, I'll just say when we're going for our application for the UCEDD is due. We would be refunded next year for our next 5 years. So whatever the process is, I would try and back up, 6 months to a year to make sure that the communication is happening. I say that realizing that ACL just sent out a forecast that is pushing that up dramatically. So I'm not feeling panicked because I don't have any changes and I have a good relationship, but I do feel like I've missed out on some time that I would be laying some groundwork and some thoughtful consideration for an ask maybe to incorporate into that. So that's a little challenge. That's a challenge that we have to now adapt to. If you haven't had these communications now, I would say now is the time to start initiating these immediately. For me, it's a bit of an urgency, but I would say very soon. So I don't know if that, and Deb, you probably have some other ideas here too. So I don't mean to claim this time.
No, I really appreciate that. I think we were all shocked, your temporal sense. Okay, we finished the Len grant, it's the summer, what's going on with COVID, and then we'll do this in the winter. Well, people plan and God laughs, so it's the fall. I think one way of thinking about that, if you haven't had chance to sort of proactively do that, is to look at things that you may have shared within the university or impact that you had, that you can use that you can revisit those things in the context of the MOU. So if you were doing work in COVID and you were communicating about that, it may not have really penetrated people's consciousness in the same way. So I would sort of try to build upon that kind of thing, but others' thoughts about that. We're really here as facilitators, not prescribers. So other thoughts or other challenges, if there are ways that, and Kenyoko, I don't know if you know the history of the MOUs, but having that under your belt would also be helpful to know. And for most of us, that's a history of budgets getting cut or indirects in addition to change, but having that sense of time. Ilka.
I just thought it would be important to emphasize what Derek said in terms of the timeliness of getting the process done. I was a very new director when the new 5-year grant came out last time around, and I had not a good handle on any of those things. And I got my MOU started very late and didn't understand all the intricacies, especially if you're really tucked into different systems. I don't know how you are organized in Hawaii, but for us, it was very challenging because we are very tucked into different places before we actually make it up to the provost to sign the document. So I had very little time, and it was extremely stressful. And I had, I thought it was interesting, Derek, you said, I think earlier about not asking for too much. But at the, it was interesting because I rewrote it because I was very concerned that I wasn't asking for the right things, or that my MOU wouldn't address all the things that we are required to do. So, and I had some pretty good ideas of like how I thought this relationship should work with the university. And I sent it up, and I think mine was 5 pages. It eventually came back and was 1.5 pages that they agreed to. They took essentially anything out that, I mean, it was really the bare minimum that they agreed to, which isn't ideal. And there's different intricacies in different organizations with that. But I think for me, that was a really good learning in terms of, I think this time I will just be a little bit more cautious. I will definitely go with what was submitted before. I might put some additional things in because I also feel I can actually talk about the impact that we have had and how we have supported the university in some ways, and I will try to get that in there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came back and they would have taken everything back out that I put in. And that's just how, in some ways, our relationship with all the way up the university works. I think the other piece, and I know others should talk too, but that the administrators in between are really the people that we are working with. We are not working directly with the provost. He's really at the end the person who signs this thing, but has absolutely no connection. The administrators in between, the grants office and the sponsored research office, those are really like some of the folks that we have to have good relationships with, and that understand, I think, a little bit better how we work as a UCEDD, even though we are still a little bit strange to them in some ways. So those are just like some learnings for me.
This is Marcia. I share some parallels with you, Ilka, but a distinct difference. I also was a brand new director when we did our last 5-year core grant, and I'm embarrassed to say we don't actually have an MOU. What we had was a letter from our dean from the School of Medicine, basically saying, it was very broad and very general, and the previous director, like, it was very functional to have it that way during the course of the previous 20 years of this center. And in the past 5 years, we've had complete turnover of leadership at the top. And the general person's agreements are completely off the table. And Derek knows some of my dilemmas this year of all of a sudden reserve accounts are no longer sacred and different things. And so I really appreciate everything you are both saying and you're sharing too, Ilka, because it is a process. It is relationship based. And I've learned so much in 6 years, to go into this next round and feel really positive in that I've already started the conversations knowing we were going into this year, because it was one of the ways I stopped a process by which I was being asked to sign a 10-year agreement on how I would be taxed. And I was like, let's wait. We are going to need to do this as part of our 5-year core grant. And I do have relationships, and it's actually interesting to hear you say it's really the administrative folks, because I'm really dealing very directly with a new interim dean who I think just didn't understand, saw dollars on the table and thought, why not, right? It's COVID, we have losses, let's take this. She's now gone, and we have a second interim dean who, it's all new. I do have a very different relationship with my direct supervisor, who's the chair in pediatrics, who I think kind of what you're saying, Ilka, understands a little more how we add value. Not that she didn't before, but she was a relatively new chair, so all these things evolve and they're very dynamic. And I was really embarrassed when AUCD asked for everyone's MOUs, and I sort of had to say, we actually don't have one. And I think we have this letter that basically says you have freedom to run the center, and as long as you're aligning with the mission of the institution, you're good to go, and we'll leave you alone. And but that's not an MOU. So somewhere in between having some grace to know that we have some autonomy, but we also have some agreements is really my goal. And my areas I'm looking at are, how do we understand our finances together? I'm happy to contribute, but I'd like to do it in a consistent, agreed upon way, not be swept periodically. how do we deal with some of the things that are, the commitments the university makes when they accept the UCEDD contract, because sometimes there's dissonance there. Well, you agreed to this contractually, but over here our administrative processes kind of violate that agreement. I hadn't even thought about some of the specific things like allocating specific parking and all of that. I think we're going to do broader strokes at this end, but it's been a learning curve for me, and just that idea that it's a constantly changing landscape, that what are the right kind of pillars to put in the ground versus having some open-endedness. That right combination is where I am right now, trying to sort that out with our folks. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Thanks. Lori, did you want to, I thought you were unmuting. The only way you can read body language is by the green line appearing. Lori, did you want to speak to some of this?
I didn't. I apologize. I am a very late joiner. I was thinking this meeting was another half an hour from now. So I apologize. I'm just catching up.
Great. Thanks. I'm glad you're here. Other thoughts?
I think something, and anyone feel free to chime in, something that I think there's the urgency, I think for those of us going up for the UCEDD grant this upcoming year, there's the urgency of now to get this document in place. But I think thinking beyond that, I think is also sometimes a good thing, because I think, of course we have to get that in place. But we're also, if you kind of think about a 5-year plan, once that is in place, of how you can build these relationships within your area, higher up, your boss and higher as well, and down, but also across the university. I think there's an approach, at least that I tend to take, is being known within the space of the university and being valued by your partners, and being viewed as a partner, as somebody who contributes to both the academic research and even the service mission, all 3 of those. And that helps people understand you, and that there's a level of protection that may come with that, or at minimum social capital that you can potentially use later on. And I think, so I do use that kind of strategy looking forward, of those investments in relationships across the university are investments for when these conversations are had, because then by then my boss will have heard, who has to sign the MOU, will have heard, that we're doing, we're doing a number of activities. We're serving the mission, and it makes these conversations, I think, in the university a lot easier. And the more layers you add to that of administrators, I report to 1, but if you add 2, 3, 4 more administrators, it's hard. It's even harder to build those relationships and to demonstrate that value, because you're in at least in that short term. So it's just something to think about. I just felt like it's made these conversations a lot easier for me.
We just were sort of saved by one of those layers of administrators negotiating a state MOU, where all of a sudden a new person in the university changed something in the MOU, that this is the successor to 18 years of work with the Department of Ed, that would have totally scuttled this MOU. And it's like $3 million a year. And it was the experience of someone at another level who was able to advocate on our behalf that really made a difference. And I'm very intrigued with what Derek was saying about having 2 MOUs. And part of the decision any of us make is how general and how specific the MOU is. And we've gone a more general route, and then have other things that are not formally called an MOU, but agreements. And part of that is this balancing act. If the university is changing the indirect for everybody, or taking away discretionary money, we can have a signed MOU with them. That's not going to make any difference. So sort of balancing some of that and continually understanding the context and explaining, if they go to do that, why your discretionary money was earned by supporting people with disabilities. That's not really for the hole in the floor of the controller. So utilizing your mission in that way, our mission, I think sometimes is helpful. But I think I think the other thing that is sort of interesting is that many of us have this immediate need now to either renegotiate or go with the old one, although the names may be, no new dean, 2 new deans, but also monitoring it over time and reinforcing why this was helpful. Next year when you get a new grant from something other than ACL, how the MOU made that possible. So you're nurturing whoever's in that office or in that function.
This is Lori. I will pipe in if I can. And I'm sure that many of you have heard Brent Askvig say this through the years. It is really to our advantage to be at a very small university that is not associated with a medical school. While there are distinct disadvantages, we really are a big fish in our tiny little pond, and $500,000 of indirect is huge for our university, as opposed to $500,000 at your universities, which is so small that they're not even, pocket change, right? And I don't know how you can leverage that. Is there a way to, I don't know, be a bigger fish in your big ponds?
To the pond analogy, it's probably inappropriate language, but in our medical school, the increasing emphasis to the exclusion of NIH-funded research makes us more pond scum if we don't highlight the ways that we serve the community mission or the pillar of planning. And it is enviable when so what brings value is very different in each place. And it's hard to walk in with your 8% indirect rate and compared to 53% or 64% for other things. So it is enviable in some ways, but I think there are some strategies you can utilize.
I mean, I think right now for our grant, especially for people who are applying this year, we can play up like sitting within a hospital within then a medical school is at least that COVID piece. It may not be huge and it may not be dollars, but the outreach to the community and helping the hospital, helping the medical school to reach the community with vaccine messages, with vaccine events, getting a certain groups vaccinated that maybe they didn't have as much access to, is at least a tiny piece where I feel like, okay, we can at least say we bring this to you. We bring this to you. We may not bring, big indirects, but that was huge. That was huge at the moment. And so I hope that we can play those types of things up that matter at the moment, even though they might not matter in a year, but at least for our application right now, it might matter.
And at Indiana University, I think last year there was $1 billion in sponsored projects at the university. That's a lot. We are a small fish compared to that. But that's not how the university works. Our university works by where people look are at the academic level, be it School of Education, the School of Public Policy, the medical school. Well, I'm under the office of the vice provost, and that is similar. It's size-wise of a school. They don't have the academic credential or credentialing, but that's how they operate. The vice provost is much like a dean. So I think finding what level your comparisons are at, I think that really matters. So for me, it doesn't matter how I fit within the university. What matters is how I fit under that. And in that environment, we are much bigger than every other center that is under that purview. So I don't leverage that in a way that is that is meant to pit me against my colleagues, because we are all in there. But I do use it to learn about my colleagues. What are they doing in their centers? What agreements do they have with the vice provost? Are they getting their any of the director's salary covered? And to me, so using that and being a partner with them rather than a competitor, we don't operate in the same space, but we do operate with the same boss. And doing my research in that space helps me be more educated as I go into these conversations. And it helps them be more educated as well. They don't have to do an MOU, I do. And that's where I can get a more formal agreement than they can maybe get. But I do think, we do leverage it though, but we also give a lot to that unit, which is, we provide a lot of indirect, but we also provide a lot of technical assistance internally to other centers. We do a lot of kind of service work to to the vice provost office. So we do quite a bit in return. But again, those are investments, and that's the level that I tend to operate on, is look there. By way of that he'll brag about that the higher ups, my boss will, which helps. But all that matters to me is the vice provost, because he's my boss and he's the one that's going to sign it.
Something else that has been a big component of our popularity at our university is we have recently gone through the Higher Learning Commission accreditation, and we did have a very poor, as a university, had a very poor rating the last time that we needed to actually have a plan of correction. And a large part of that was the university really looking into student engagement, student quality of education, proof or verification that they were making good, substantial educational gains. And we were probably the program within the university that understood how to do that better than anybody. And we could offer so many opportunities for engagement for our students. And by really diving in and being a part of that plan of correction, it bought us a lot of goodwill. And so it could be that the UCEDDs can really get into the education quality components and really shine in that regard.
I really like the creativity in thinking about how you can be of service and have visibility that way, because I think I'm seeing a lot of traction in that area as we talk about these things. I remember a comment my department chair said, like my first time I ever met with her, she said, you see the entire state of New Mexico as your constituent, but you don't see the university as a recipient of your resources. And I was like, oh, well, that's something we'll change. And we have. I really love the mission-driven kind of approach too. I have used that around some of the efforts to sort of look at our reserve and saying things like, the artificial fiscal year process creates an opportunity for us to build reserve, often because we can't hire or projects are getting off the ground. But the state gave us this money to serve individuals who are medically fragile and have developmental disability. This is like Larry Barker. He's a local, journalist that goes around finding stories about how bad the university is doing, would like to get a hold of the idea that we did fix the floor in the comptroller's office using, and what I want to negotiate very specifically is that we can use our dollars more like a traditional nonprofit. Because once they go into reserve, I'm very restricted about how I can use them. And I really can just close out loss, which is a very inelegant way to run a business. So part of what I want to do is build in business practices that are allowed because of our center status, and keep those dollars aligned with the mission. The other thing that is not so much part of the MOU, but one of the things is that we've been talking about is using some of our resource to build an endowed director position, which we actually do have some traction within the institution. And to me also builds that visibility, and it shows buy-in at the regents level. So it's sort of all combined, isn't it? Like how to keep the visibility of who we are, how we serve, how we're of service and why we're important, and therefore we should be in a position to negotiate. This is a very helpful conversation. Thank you guys for having it. So, thank you.
I really appreciate what everybody's saying and the way you've just conceptualized. I feel like we're always in the business of translating, translating what, and it's, to me, in terms of kind of long life in this field, is the idea that behind a UCEDD, that you're a bridge between the community and the university. And the traffic on that bridge goes both directions of bringing knowledge, assistance to the community, but bringing the needs of the community and the community into the university. But that's fairly unique. So we're always translating what we do in terms of the ways that universities think, but also broadening it. So we have used things from the, even in promotion for people or evaluation, we've had to translate what people's roles are in relation to some of the Carnegie Council information, but always sort of trying to think about how we don't fit, and how every fiscal year we have to explain that if we haven't expended grant funds, they're not there to plug a deficit in our department, that we're mission driven and accountable and auditable. But it's that always trying to see, but hold both perspectives simultaneously.
I think I'm going to use that. That was very well stated, that bridge metaphor. I appreciate that. I think, and Marcia, you kind of alluded to this. When I think of my MOU is actually pretty basic. It really hits on just 3 or so things. And much of it is around finance. One of them is about indirect and substantial, and the other is about rent. Those are the big ones that if things change, we would feel it dramatically, would be very negative. And I say that because I think about your MOUs and what's in there. What are the things that could hurt you if they're taken away? And then ask yourself, and I think I'll just use the indirect as a good example. Are you using it? So indirect, you're asking for it. Are you using it, or are you just building it? Because part of this, I think, is I have to justify 5 years from now that was important. And if I'm not using it and I'm not demonstrating that, and all I'm doing is building a nest egg that administrators see and salivate after, then why wouldn't they take it? They do have reasons to use it. So whatever it is you're asking for, space, if you're asking for space and it's in your MOU and you're not using it, then I can guarantee your university, like every university on this planet, is out of space. Somebody probably wants your space. So to me, if you are asking for these things, you should be using it in that MOU. Find other ways to then, if it's to build reserves in that, find other ways, or at least write it in the MOU to protect yourself. Because to me, these are like, for the MOU, that's how I've approached it. I just want to reiterate, there are a lot of different ways to approach these. Don't take anything that anyone said here as well way. You're going to have to kind of custom make your approach to these and figure out what works best for you. But that's how kind of my thinking is been around these.
And this also may be in the category of a single entendre, but the whole issue of space right now, with so many people working remotely, that we've committed to, within the limits of safety, of always now having people in our center, few, far between, distance, etc., but kind of thinking forward about that. On the other hand, there are some programs who have made the decision that that what they've been learned from being remote has made it possible for them to translate some of what they were spending on rent to utilize, that. And to me, there's almost a hierarchy of Maslow's basic needs that, and maybe it's a East Coast problem, I need to hang on to space. Even if I've lost indirects, I have to hold on to space. And that may be our individual context. But that. And one of the things that I'm aware of, thinking retrospectively of what the last 5 years, who would have predicted COVID? Who would have predicted the financial crisis? But yet people still need a place to work. So that's there. We're getting close to time. There are people that we haven't heard from and some very gracious comments in the chat. Are there other issues that people want to raise, ask for help with?
Well, if not, we can wrap up a few minutes early, give you all a brief break before your next meeting, if you have one. I am gonna put a survey link in the chat. If you could fill out a survey and let us know how this event went, and if there are future topics that you would be interested in discussing in the Admin Essentials series, that would be great. And I want to especially thank you all for coming, and especially I want to thank Derek and Deborah for this amazing conversation and just really guiding this conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the rest of you got even more out of it, actually, as context.
And as an academic, I feel an obligation to make a citation that the idea of a bridge to the community is not original to me. It comes out of the president's panel in 1962 of the whole concept of UCEDD. So, but
I'll have to reread that.
yeah, so we'll think of each other in parallel play this fall as we're all doing that. It's really nice to see everyone, and I appreciate being with everyone.
Thank you both. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, if anyone does want a full MOU from any other institution that's comparably situated, feel free to reach out to me anytime, whether that's tomorrow or in 3 months. I have a large collection that I can sift through and find some good ones that might be helpful for you. So have a great rest of your day.
Take care, everyone. Be well.